Hello, thank you for joining me once again. I am continuing the reading of the Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. We are on chapter 11 and this will be part 3. So for those of you who are reading along, it's on page 160 at the part of Defense Against Unwanted Programming. Thank you for subscribing. Welcome to all the new subscribers, and those that have not subscribed, now is a great time. And everybody can push the like button. So let's get started. Defense against unwanted programming. Unfortunately, our lack of familiarity with the workings of programmability of our subconscious mind has not only created problems in our emotional and personal lives, but more importantly, it has left us prey to many individuals and organizations that would have us see things their way. Most of us don't even know when this has happened. We have a full set of rational reasons for why we believe this or that, and the sons of Belial and their servants know how to and do use such methods of influence. The fact is, a great deal of what you think and of what you believe has little to do with your independent and creative thought process. I know that sounds incredible and frightening, but it is quite true. Even that which might be considered mundane or of little importance, such as advertising to sell various products, uses techniques of psychological, subconscious, and subliminal manipulation. Listen to the music. Before we go on, I would like to touch upon the power of music, especially as it relates to unwanted programming. Music has been said to be the closest thing to a language of God. It has been used for rituals since the beginning of time. The Catholic Church used music by Bach to inspire churchgoers. I read that rival Bolero was actually based on an African shamanic ritual music piece used to stimulate or open the chakras. Allegedly, in his first public performance of it, he was devastated because the audience failed to applaud at all. 15 minutes later, as he sat depressed in the alley behind the concert hall, he heard the audience suddenly giving rave applause. They were apparently so moved, stunned, entranced, or in revere that it took them quite a while to come out of it and respond. The first half of Ravel's Daphnis et Coli Suite No. 2 is like a musical representation of the Kundalini rising and the subsequent bliss. It is incredibly beautiful. Music definitely has the power to make you strongly feel all kinds of emotions, from the bliss of touching God to depression and loneliness to feelings of lust or violence. The right positive instrument or lyrical music can be a wonderful meditation in and of itself. But there is far more here than meets the eye or ear. Even before I came to the monastery, back when I was studying alternative religions and spiritual path as a young teenager, I was also studying psychology and learning things about the subconscious mind and subliminal programming. At some point back then, I also came to realize that there was a major war going on between the forces of dark and light, right there on the radio and on records. And no one I personally knew at the time even noticed it, and I believed it had at least some effects on the listeners via the subconscious. I'm not talking about alleged backward masking subliminal programming. I can't say I've heard it at all, but the backward masking clips that I have heard, which people claim are satanic messages, could just as easily be a drunk slurring words about their laundry, whereas the kind of thing I'm talking about was something quite different, very clear and overtly blatant. I'm referring to lyrics that were and still are right there up front, flaunting themselves in people's faces, or ears and brains in this case. I noticed that most people don't really listen or really pay attention to the lyrics of a song. And it seemed to me that because of this, they were getting subliminal information just by virtue of ignoring the lyrics. Psychological studies were being done about this sort of thing back then. But as usual, there was no consensus among scientists, and some studies were secretly done for advertising purposes. Of the studies that were available, some supported and some argued against the theories that related to my conclusion. So, what can you do? Make up your mind, which is what I did. For my own observations and studies, I concluded that the less people paid attention to the lyrics, the more the lyrics bypassed their normal subconscious mind filters and defense mechanisms and went right into their subconscious minds. My studies in hypnosis had shown how things that slipped right by the subconscious mind and couldn't be consciously recalled were being stored and recorded by the mind and couldn't be consciously recalled. My studies in hypnosis has shown how things that slipped right by the conscious mind and couldn't be consciously recalled were being stored and recorded by the subconscious constantly, like a built-in human personal surveillance system. I heard of one incident where the police used hypnosis to get the license plate number of a car used in a robbery. The information was stored in a man's subconscious and was merely seen by him only with his peripheral vision. He never looked directly at the license plate. But the problem was this personal surveillance system, the subconscious mind, wasn't just a recorder. It had influence with many aspects of our lives, emotions, beliefs, personality, etc. Anyway, as I studied song lyrics, I found many interesting things. Some, of course, were just mild, self-oriented love songs or party songs, but some were clearly more negative. From self-destructive to out and out evil of all kinds. Yet, these were never noticed or complained about by the public at the time. Other songs had positive, uplifting, and truly spiritual lyrics. In fact, it seemed to me that if higher and lower consciousness beings of any kind wanted to communicate with and affect the minds of the masses, it was a perfect medium for it. Some lyrics were so spiritual that one would almost have to conclude that the songwriter was enlightened and had great spiritual knowledge. Then, later in life, I got to meet many of the musicians whose lyrics were so strikingly saint-like and spiritual. I discovered that some were just average conscious people, some maybe a little above average, some maybe below average, and some were egoed out jerks. What they all had in common was they were getting stoned on hallucinogenic drugs, and since playing music was like a meditation technique, they were getting into a trance-like state and just channeled these incredible lyrics. On the dark side, the same thing was happening, but the musicians were definitely way below average consciousness. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating any kind of censorship other than personal censorship. The lesson: make sure you know the lyrics of the music you are listening to. Read the lyric sheets if you must, then choose what you want to listen to, knowing that whatever it is, you are allowing some of it into your conscious and subconscious mind, and it may have effects. Now on to the other, deeper aspects of programming. Realizing you have been brainwashed. Sometimes I hear the word brainwashing thrown about, usually in reference to religious cults, political ploys, or captives of some kind. Such talk always makes me stop and think to myself, brainwashing from what? To what? It is usually just brainwashing from one framework of unconscious mental programming to another framework of unconscious mental programming. Please don't get me wrong. I'm in no way defending mind manipulation by religious cults, political movements, governments, car salesmen, or any individual/organization who would use means that breach the sanctity of mental freedom or free will. My point, though, is that we are all already brainwashed and still in the process because of our programming was not voluntarily or consciously chosen. And where we have all of us received our involuntary programming from? Cults. Shocking, isn't it? But it's true. Now let's try saying that again, only not using an abbreviation. And where have all of us received our involuntary programming from? Our cultures. Not as shocking, right? Yet still just as true. And the fact is, regardless of who or what involuntary programmed you, it still comes down to this. You didn't choose your own programming or beliefs. And that comes with serious problems, unless you were involuntarily programmed by an enlightened being, and an enlightened beings don't do that kind of things to others. Interestingly enough, the word cult is merely just an abbreviation of the word culture. But it is deliberately used in a defamatory, inflammatory, and negative way. It is harder to demonize a group of people you call a culture rather than a group of people you call a cult. So when we, others, or the media are talking about a particular group, unique group, tribe, or religion, we call them a culture if we want to present it in a positive light, or a cult if we want to present it in a negative light and conjure up fear and loathing. It's all dependent on how you feel about them or want someone else to feel about them. Involuntary programming, such as that which we receive from our culture and its robots, our culturally programmed peers, involves attempting to trample our free will choices just as much as involuntary reprogramming. Cultural and peer programming doesn't trample our free will nearly as much as true, classic, military-type brainwashing. But still, people have no idea what a substantial and nearly total influence it has on their lives. No one realizes how few free will choices they make and have made for actually choosing how they live their own lives. Before I go any further, please understand this whole area of discussion involves complex paradoxes. I'm about to focus on and discuss only one aspect of the paradox, how and where you were raised and how strongly the involuntary programming from that affects your life. But once you keep in mind that there is something to genetics, breeding, and behind it all, karma. Note who your soul is, so to speak, what you need to experience in life a way, and why you were born with certain genetics in a certain culture and raised a certain way. I have seen many newborn babies in which I can immediately see aspects of who they are and what kind of personality they will have. That is their spirit, their soul, for the most part. So with all that in mind, let's focus on culture programming, which remember is only half of the whole truth. Programming from our culture, family, and peers strongly affects our lives. This is more of an influence during a person's youth and lessens to a degree at about age 7. Then more at about age 14, and then quite substantially when their soul really kicks in fully at around 21. And a person regains their full past level of consciousness. At that point, they can really start making more free will changes in their lives and either expand their awareness/consciousness or degenerate. For instance, why is a child raised by a Buddhist family in a Buddhist culture likely be a Buddhist when he grows up? Similarly, why a Lutheran child or a Muslim child or Jewish child, also raised in the beliefs of their own family and culture, very likely to grow up having the same beliefs? Why is the abused child of an abused mother and a wife/child beating father likely to grow up and live the same way? Programming. Programming plays an essential role. People are all programmed by their families, friends, schools, teachers, news media, books, magazines, you name it. Just think, if 98% of everything you think, believe, and do is from your subconscious mind, and it has been programmed by someone else, what are the primary influences that control your destiny in life? It's staggering to think about it, isn't it? As I write this, there is a new television sitcom that just premiered that involves the clash of cults between a husband who was raised as a meat-eating, rich conservative lawyer for the federal government. His wife is a vegetarian who was raised as a radical liberal hippie who teaches yoga and protests the government. It makes for great comedy, but it also makes a point. If those children's parents had been reversed and their upbringing and programming thus been reversed, their roles would be exactly the opposite of what they are. The wife would be the conservative government lawyer, and the husband would be the groovy hippie dude. Again, excluding the concept that they are already what they are soul-wise, and were just karmically born into those respective family situations to enable them to return to being what they have already made themselves into internally. Can you say that you truly filtered, analyzed, and controlled the programming you received your whole life that developed your beliefs and behavioral patterns? The brain of a newborn child has little programming, yet there's not much there. So you can't literally call it brainwashing when it begins to get programmed. But programming is programming, whether it is for the first time or it is reprogramming, brainwashing of old data. Everyone has been programmed. Everyone has been brainwashed. You have been programmed and brainwashed. You may not know it or want to accept it, but you have been. And you are under the control of that programming right now. And most everything about your life has to do with it. You are even reacting to what you are reading in this book right at this moment, partly based on your programming. Even when programming is altered of a person's own choice, the average person doesn't have a clue to analyzing or programming their own mind. So they often accept programming from other people. Sometimes the programming they accept is from another unconsciously programmed person who is just passing along their programming to you. I saw so-and-so today, and they said, and you believe it and just altered your programming to include it. Or I read in the paper that, and you accept it as fact and altered your programming. But worse, you are also often programmed by people who really do understand programming and use it to manipulate you. So basically, brainwashing, in the sense of reprogramming, is the common everyday occurrence of voluntarily allowing someone else to alter our programming. When a person changes their beliefs or programming because of input from an external source, such as with brainwashing, they are only exchanging one unconscious program for another unconscious program. In other words, they are unconsciously exchanging one piece of garbage they didn't choose to have and don't know that they didn't choose to have for another piece of garbage they didn't choose to have and don't know that they didn't choose to have. This happens to us all the time, and the trouble is the unconscious programming has immense power and control over our life and destiny. Take news story, for instance. If they showed some pictures of bombs going off and said it was such and such terrorist group, and you accept it without direct experience, your programming has been altered in a serious way, possibly even creating feelings of anger and hate in you and clouding fair judgment. Wars are started and prolonged this way. Products are sold this way. Votes are manipulated this way. Lives are controlled this way. In these modern times, many of your beliefs are formed through media exposure. You could totally believe tomorrow that we are about to be nuked by the Russians. Be ready to sacrifice your life and your child's life in order to go to war. And it could be totally false information. Your programming was simply altered a bit, all based on news stories that you accepted in your programming. Orson Welles' radio broadcast of War of the Worlds is a good example of this. It was a dramatic radio sci-fi show about Martians invading Earth, of all things. But it was done in the fashion of news coverage. People panicked all over the country. Not one person really saw a Martian ship, troops, fighting, nothing. I think people died of heart attacks and other things related to the panic. People got out their guns and were heading for the front lines. People believed this radio broadcast on a mass scale, even though it was a totally fictitious and far-fetched sci-fi story. You could be manipulated to believe that Muslims are good or Muslims are evil and cruel without ever knowing a Muslim or even hearing about experiences with them from a clearly experienced, trusted friend. The same with Jews or Catholics or such and such, cultists or whatever. You could feel totally supportive of incarcerating or even killing a man that you have been told committed a murder, even if it were totally false and all based on stories. It happens all the time. You can send money to feed starving children, not knowing that the money is merely lining the pockets of a fat executive and feel really good about yourself. If you don't take care and take full responsibility for your programming yourself, somebody else will, and always does. And your beliefs and the world you mentally live in could be nothing but fabrications for purposes of controlling you. On the other hand, it is difficult to brainwash or program an individual who is well versed in their own mental process, at least with the techniques and processes that are commonly called brainwashing. However, hardcore brainwashing, very sophisticated methods, various psychological techniques, physical torture, sleep deprivation, drugs, and electronic or surgical brain manipulation can change nearly anyone. The book, 1984, gives a good example of such intense manipulation and brainwash. washing. But in order to attain true independence of mind and free will, a person must consciously, deliberately analyze their beliefs and choose their own programming. As in the cases we've just cited, brainwashing can be a term that is used to mean someone has been truly involuntarily programmed against their will. Brainwashing is often used as a nasty word for programming changes we disagree with. For instance, what actually happens when an adult changes religious, political parties, or any other belief? Let's say the person changes religion. If you think the change was fully voluntary and you don't mind his new choice, you might say he's converted. But if you don't like the person's new religion or the person's association with it, or whatever you might say, he has been brainwashed, regardless of whether the person chose to make those changes or not. Jesus was considered a cultist in his time and a manipulator, and his followers were considered cultists. Early Christians were considered a cult for a very long time. Early Protestant churches began as cults with a cult leader. Mormons also suffered the same label and subsequent persecutions. European religious cults fled to the United States to avoid persecution, and many are now just considered major religions. Oftentimes, the only difference between a cult and a religion is how big it is and how long it has managed to survive the attacks of society when it was considered a cult. It is sadly all too easy for people to forget and lack understanding and tolerance of the religions of others. Even some of the major religions still attack other major religions because of their beliefs. Unfortunately, the word brainwashing is sometimes used as a negative slur or rationalization regarding the belief or attitude changes of a person has voluntarily made. This often occurs when a person dislikes the voluntary programming another person has chosen for themselves. When someone thusly claims another person has been brainwashed, such as in the case of someone calling a religion a cult, they can then rationalize and justify even kidnapping and truly brainwashing this person to fit their own way of thinking. When someone thusly claims another person has been brainwashed, such as in the case of someone calling a religion a cult, they then can rationalize and justify even kidnapping and truly brainwashing the person to fit their own way of thinking. It is most often used in the case of people who have changed religions, especially to an unconventional or highly disliked religion. Relatives of that person or their previous religion may claim they have been brainwashed by the new religion. For instance, my mother proclaimed I was brainwashed when I returned from Tibet. Obviously, my changes were so radical, she had a great deal of support for this claim from all her friends, relatives, and anyone else who would listen to her story. And she tried to have me deprogrammed, brainwashed, back to her way of thinking. But it had no effect on me because only I have been in charge of my programming since I became an adept. There was nothing to deprogram from me, and her real motives were not because she thought I was actually brainwashed. She was just using brainwash as a rationalization to explain my so-called strange choices in life. The real reason she did it involved my rejection of the family religion, not thinking and behaving as she did. And she thought I should. Failure to live what she considered a normal life, which would have been becoming a successful doctor or lawyer, and in an odd way, personal rejection and jealousy. Another common situation in which you hear the cry of brainwashing is in child custody cases, where a child favors one parent and turns against the other. The rejected parent will most often blame the other parent for brainwashing the child and turning them against them. Again, in both of these instances, it could be true or just a slur. But where the term brainwashing originally came from and what it really means is something altogether different. The term really came from hideous methods of using force to alter programming under extreme duress, totally involuntarily. Various modern forced brainwashing methods were invented during World War II by spies and military types to control people's minds. Oddly enough, such World War II methods were employed by so-called cult deprogrammers. But I have never heard of a cult using such horrible methods to bend or break someone's mind to their way of thinking. A cult may employ strong or clever influencing and manipulation methods, but any I have ever heard of are still really ultimately allowing free choice. If they did, they would be jailed, like many deprogrammers have been. A deprogrammer, however, generally takes severe, true forced brainwashing approaches, commonly hiring or enlisting people to kidnap a person and or hold them prisoner by force, and in one way or another cause a total emotional/mental breakdown so that they can infuse the programming they, or typically the parents that hired them, want them to have. Even the term deprogrammer is a deception. They are reprogrammers in the traditions of the forced, emotionally torturous classic brainwashers. They employ various brainwashing methods while the person is being held virtually or literally prisoner by either family, friends, accomplices, or hired black belt thugs. It may be relatively mild, but that is rare. Sometimes it involves surrounding the victim with a dozen or more people who constantly scream at them, attacking their emotional or mental weaknesses, their beliefs, and when total nervous breakdown finally occurs, they fill the victim's mind with what is right and true to believe, whatever the brainwasher wants them to believe. This may go on for hours or days as the deprogrammer takes turns and rest while the helpless prisoner is denied sleep or their own free thoughts. Sometimes they tie a person to a chair naked, refuse them to sleep, food, or water. I have never heard anyone even claim such radical things took place in religious cults. Like I said, such behavior would result in arrest or prison. There have been the odd suicide pacts, but again, upon analysis, people voluntarily choose to do it, with the possible exception of Joneses. So, no matter how weird, if they choose it without true brainwashing, they at least had some choice. But deprogrammers leave absolutely no choice. Manipulation of the psyche, whether it be by cult, media, or car salesmen, is wrong. Make no mistake. And the results of such manipulation can be devastatingly different. Like that between ending up with a car you never intended to buy, or supporting a war that doesn't have any true foundation, or committing suicide. But that is my whole point. That is what parts the ancient teachings and parts of this book are for, to teach you to take control of your own programming and prevent others from manipulating your mind. But deprogrammers are among the worst. They usually cross the line and justify their going beyond mere manipulation of your mind. And while some deprogrammers have fortunately been arrested and imprisoned, too many are allowed to do their dirty work and get away with it because they are attacking generally unpopular religions. Let someone try deprogramming a Catholic because they have their weird ways, like believing they are eating the flesh and blood of Jesus during communion, or deprogramming a Pentecostal for speaking in tongues, or a Jew for wailing at the wall and refusing to eat pork, etc., etc. And see how far the deprogrammers gets before being incarcerated. Again, it's the size of the religion that determines whether or not the term cult is applied, and all the prejudice and mistreatment that go with it. And if you want to talk about something ending in tragedy, deprogrammers leave a trail of devastated lives. I have studied this in college, and I have personally known 6 people who were deprogrammed. Other than 2 failed attempts on me, one of these was a novice student of mine. The others were from various small Christian churches, cults, if you choose to call them that, of one kind or another. All were previously happy, well-adjusted people. One was beaten to death by his deprogrammer's black belt jailers. 2 ended up committing suicide within a few months of being fixed by the deprogrammers. 1 ended up a permanent resident of a mental ward. 1 became a deprogrammer himself. And the other did what they were programmed to do: shift directions in life. In that last case, the person sort of adjusted to living a life they never really wanted in the first place. A life that didn't allow them to fulfill their spiritual potential, as much as their original programming would have, their true free will choices would have. It also left a bad scar and emotional / brainwashed damage, including mental blocks, memory loss, and strange physical illnesses. You could say this was karmic too, but most people's programming has something to do with their karma. It is a reflection of and part of their karma. And while a deprogramming or brainwashing can also be karmic, it could also be an attack from the dark forces that comes out of the blue, leaving you virtually unable to even deal with your karma and fulfill your original destiny. Whether a programming change is fully voluntary or somehow manipulated, which most every religion, political party, or salesman will attempt, or is actually forced, the same result occurs. Programming is altered. So that's the bottom line, and that's what really needs to be focused on. Because of all the things mentioned throughout this entire chapter, the ancient Atlantean teachings of the children cover all aspects of programming. This includes teaching how to free yourself from unwanted programming, to avoid brainwashing, and how to be in control of and constantly reprogram your own mind. In order to change your susceptibility to manipulation and strengthen your independence of thought, you must first realize the facts and implications involved. Then, using a teacher, meditation, self-hypnosis, various vibrational techniques, biofeedback, or other means of accessing modified states, you can set about reevaluating the entire contents of your mind, the sources of most feelings and thoughts. You may also want to use the Atlantean vibrational sound tapes. Then you'll finally be safe from brainwashing by even the dreaded car salesman. A final thought. Important fact: no matter how good of a means you use to self-program your subconscious mind, it will not accept the programming unless you really want to change. So take control of your life on both conscious and subconscious levels. Don't believe anything you haven't really experienced yourself, or a truly trusted and objective person you know has experienced. Don't let anyone program you anymore but yourself. You decide your beliefs, not press releases, books, ads, media owners and controllers, leaders, religions, department store owners, car salesmen, gas station attendants, your friends, your relatives, your mates, this book, a teacher, or anyone but you. And remember, kindness and unselfish love for everything and everyone are the only really important things. If something doesn't include that, watch out. I'd like to add one final statement regarding cultures. One of the best eye-opening experiences anyone can have that shows them just how much we are all programmed is to experience different cultures. Not just vacations here and there, but really experiencing as many different cultures in the world as possible. The same basic human being can have such radical different beliefs and different ways of living that a person who hasn't experienced it couldn't really believe it. You can get it intellectually, of course, and watch travel shows, but you don't really get it until you have done it. Most of you reading this would be shocked to see a baby buried alive because it was born a female. But that's just scratching the surface, and your culture is just as appalling and shocking to me. When will you all wake up and take control of your programming and reprogram yourself in the light of truth, kindness, and universal consciousness? When will you stop killing those who bring you new ideas? Maybe soon, because the universe, this planet, is going to change things here radically because of what humans have done, and it's coming, ready or not. Okie doke. That was the end of chapter 11. We are now obviously on chapter 12, and that will be on page 168. And I've been reading The Children of the Law of One in the Lost Teaching of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. Thank you for listening. Those that have not subscribed, please take the time to do so. Hit the like button, everybody, and everybody come back for chapter 12. And until then, have the most benevolent day.